Hello, my name is Reese, and today we are going to chat about abundance. But first, a reminder that this is brought to you by Root, which is a school and movement that is understanding the root level systems of humanity in order to find a root for all of us, a future that we can all live into. If you're excited by that, check out our Root Fellowship, which has cohorts that happen once every couple of months. And you can join an upcoming Root Fellowship with a community of world-class systems thinkers looking to understand and build the future. Check us out at root.co. And wherever you are, whoever you are, I hope you're doing well. So we are in our last section here, abundance and generosity. We're chatting about abundance today and these processes of abundance. So to do that, we're going to look at different resource types because that's a helpful way to think about abundance. And then we'll look at trust, trying to make trust abundant, trying to make value or kind of like money abundant, and then trying to make wisdom abundant. Okay, but first, let's talk about these resource types. So as we've always talked about, we have this timeline of humanity and how we had the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, information revolution. And the agricultural revolution was all about food, and the industrial revolution was all about goods, and the information revolution is all about info. And in each of these things, we made them more abundant. And so, this agricultural revolution, we took the sunlight and the soil and the water, we put it through these newfound, we were able to do agriculture. It was amazing. And especially, in later industrial strength agriculture, we made lots and lots of food. And we had an abundance of food. And in the Industrial Revolution, we took all the raw materials, raw metal and fiber, pushed it through these factories, and boom, got goods, got t-shirts, got all these amazing things. And then we got an abundance of goods. And the Information Revolution is a little bit different, but similar, where we took electricity and we put it through, computers and the internet and the protocol layers, these TCP/IP, and now information can go anywhere in the world, all for free. And this example of Bill Gates here, where it's like, he's holding this little CD that contains all the same data that all this printer paper could, needed to hold in the past. So it's like, wow, information is now abundant. It can be it can be in a very small CD, and you can put that anywhere in the world. And in order to understand the difference between these revolutions, we need to talk about public versus private goods. So the way to think about this is, we've always talked about this networked human organism and how it uses knowledge, it does its sense making, and then it uses that, says, what should I do? I'm going to use energy to move these atoms in the world towards this goal of, the sustainability of the human race or whatever. And the way to think about it is that, when it's doing sense making, it's doing that with bits. It's like consuming, we have all of the internet, it's consuming all these different kinds of bits and sending them all around the world, trying to understand what's happening. And then it's moving those atoms. It's, creating more food or creating t-shirts or whatever. And so those bits versus atoms can be put on this spectrum here, and this is a thing in economics, it's just a little simple 2x2. And the idea is that atoms go in this top left corner, in this, this corner here. And that's what we call a private good. And a private good is something that is rivalrous. And what that means is that if I consume it, you can't also consume it. So if I have an apple, if I eat the apple, you can't also eat the same apple. That's hard. And then excludable means that I can stop you from consuming it. So if I have an apple, I can put it in my pocket, and I could say, no, this is my apple. You can't eat my apple. So I can exclude you from getting my good. So that's what we call a private good, and that's what all these atoms-based things are. Versus a public good, which is non-rivalrous. And non-rivalrous means that if I consume it, you can also consume it. So if I watch a YouTube video or look at a meme on the internet, you can look at it too. My consumption of it doesn't stop your consumption of it because they're just bits. They can just fly all over the place. And it's non-excludable, which means that it's hard to exclude people from it, right? It just goes over TCP/IP. If I put something on YouTube, anybody can watch it. I can't be like, no, you can't watch it. So these public goods are in the world of bits, and they are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. There are other public goods that we often talk about, like the air or nature, where it is something, something like air or something like public defense maybe is the best example. National security is non-rivalrous because if I consume it, you also get it as well. It's like we have our tanks and they help everybody. And it's non-excludable, where it's hard for the tanks to like stop the people from shooting me, but not stop them from shooting you. And so air is similar, where air is just, it's around everybody, and it's non-rivalrous, where it's like my consumption of the air doesn't stop yours. Like we're all just consuming the air. And it's non-excludable, where it's like I can't put you in I can't say, no, you don't get to have air. It just exists. So that's those two, but then there's these other two quadrants as well. The first is what they call club goods. And a club good is something where you put a fence around it. So it's a non-rivalrous thing, let's say like Netflix, where it's like, okay, we have this Netflix movie out there, but they found a way to make it excludable. Where they said, you know what? We're going to make it so only people with a password can watch it. Which kind of doesn't make sense, because in theory, it's free, right? Anybody can, once you have the movie on the internet, you can just send it to anybody all for free, but they put a little ring around it. They put a fence around it. And you can put a fence around everything. You can put a fence around a park and say, this park is now a club, and only if you pay the money to get in the club can you use it. Or you can put it around a movie theater and say, although it's technically possible, we could just open the doors here and anybody that was walking by could watch this because the light waves are non-rivalrous, and we're going to exclude people, and only the people who pay money can get in. And so those are the classic example of a club good is a toll road, where you put in theory, a road is just a public good. It's non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Like my use of it doesn't stop your use of it, and anybody can use them. But if there's too many people on the road, then you might make it excludable and say, you know what, you need to pay money to get on the road. And then it turns into a club good. And then the top right corner here is a common pool resource, which is something that is rivalrous, like a fish. So like a fish pond here, where it's like if I catch the fish, you can't catch the same fish. But it's non-excludable because you have a big old pond, and it's like, okay, we're trying to keep people out, but we're in the ocean or whatever, and it's hard to stop people from fishing here. And this is when you get things like overfishing. So this little 2x2 is very helpful to think about. And you can put our atoms and bits on it, where the private goods are rivalrous and excludable. That's the world of atoms, right? And you're making all these goods, and you're stopping people from using them. And that's how it works. And it's interesting because I'll talk about this in a second. So that is on that side. The other side is the Bill Gates here with our internet. And that is it's kind of a public good, kind of a club good, because with something like, on TCP/IP, that's more of a public good where it flows wherever and it's non-excludable. But a lot of the internet is becoming more and more excludable. And so it looks more and more like a club good, where only if you're in the club can you get access to it. This is very connected to this idea of positive sum versus zero sum. And the difference between these, so zero sum is, in my opinion, a little bit easier to understand. It's things where you have a pie and you can only, dish it up in a certain way. So attention is a zero sum resource. If I'm watching YouTube, I can't also watch Facebook at the same time. It's like I gotta kind of pay attention to one or the other. And this is why you have these attention folks who they want the attention, and if the other person gets it, they're not like, oh, that's okay, it's fine. It's like, no, they need the attention. And so attention is a zero-sum good, or zero-sum resource. Status is another classic one, and this is anything that is where you're being relative to each other is going to be zero sum. So something like status is like, I am higher than you, right? That higher part, I am better, I am richer, I am stronger, I am faster. Any of those things mean that you're better than the other person. And so on, Twitter or whatever, someone who has more followers versus someone who has less, look, if it's a zero-sum game there's only so much attention. You're trying to get more attention, so you try to get more status, and status is relative to other people, it's not like the people who are high status, if everybody got raised up to that level, well, then the status would be kind of worthless. So it's all about being relative. And power is very similar, and this is power, this is not like being empowered, but power in the sense of how much leverage you have over someone, where it's like, if I have a lot of power over here and then you start to also have a lot of power, well, they have to kind of battle each other because power is all about the leverage over the other person. And so it's another relative form of a zero-sum resource. So just be aware of these zero-sum resources as you go forth. And they're rivalrous, right? Something like attention is it's impossible for two people to consume my time at the same time. I can't just divide my time infinity and then give it to everybody. Okay, positive sum is the other side. So positive sum, we talked a lot about this info one already, which is, again, it's an anti-rival, or it's a non-rivalrous thing. You can just create the info, duplicate it as many times as you want, send it all around the world, all for free. And similarly, you can start to think about trust and money as positive sum. And by positive sum, we mean, instead of a pie that you're kind of dividing or being relative to other people, instead you're saying, look, there can just be more of this thing. So you're kind of making the pie bigger. And with money, well, money, in theory, it's a rivalrous resource, right? If $1's in my pocket, it can't also be in your pocket. But if you zoom out to the bento box and think about needs, then it can be positive sum, where you say, I have this money over here, and you can't have it. But let's say that all of my needs are already met. Well, once that happens, I don't really need more of it. And so I can just give it to you, and it doesn't actually hurt me by giving it to you because my needs are already met. And in fact, by meeting your needs, that helps me meet my needs. And so it becomes this positive sum resource when you zoom out to the level of needs. Something like trust is also positive sum, where me trusting you doesn't mean I can't also trust your mother. I can trust multiple people, and I can also trust Airbnb. I can trust all of these different things. And so you can just make more and more trust by choosing to trust more things. So when we connect this back to our revolutions here, these positive sum or win-win games, you can play them with both rivalrous or anti-rivalrous goods, where with the agricultural revolution and industrial revolution, that's the world of atoms. And so it's going to be rivalrous because we both can't eat the same apple. And it was still a win-win game, though, because, as we see here, we had these frontiers where we could there were so many atoms out there that were just ready to be mined and developed and exploited. And there was so much science that could be developed to make us better at, using them. And so, you could play a win-win game where you could say, hey, although, where you could just create more and more things for more and more people. And even though it was a rivalrous thing, we all had enough t-shirts. We're just growing the pie of t-shirts. And then similarly with the information revolution, that's a non-rivalrous thing, right? With bits. But again, we are still playing this growing the pie game where there's so much bits frontier to be had. And so when people go out there and are trying to develop it, really, they are putting in good development work to grow the pie of good bits that we can consume, right? The world as it is today with Wikipedia and YouTube and all these amazing things is a bigger pie for everybody. And that's especially true because it's a non-rivalrous good where you can consume the same information that I can consume. This battle between growing the pie versus redividing it happens a lot. For example, a lot of the tech world perhaps is focused on growing the pie. They're like, okay, we need to create more businesses that rearrange the bits or atoms in the world better to make it so that more people have more things. While a lot of kind of social justice activist types perhaps might be more into redividing it, which is reasonable as well, because you had these folks down here like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, who now is worth $100 billion. He grew the pie by making something like Facebook, which is worth $800 billion. But did he grow? Does he deserve an eighth of that value? Maybe not. So maybe we should redivide the pie a little bit there. So you'll see this balance a lot between growing the pie versus redividing it and remember, growing the pie is kind of a positive something. Oh, let's just make the pie bigger. Everybody can win, versus redividing it, which is like, okay, let's make it's a comparative thing. It's like, no, there's a pie is a certain size, and you get 10%, and I will get 20%. Okay, what do these resource types feel like in your body? I think it is cool. I think it's just a helpful way to think about resources. And I especially love so I guess I'm feeling in my body a sense of excitement. Especially club goods. I just love thinking, I love club goods. Where it's a cool concept. And especially the atoms versus bits thing is a cool way to conceptualize the world. And really you can see, so much of the world is they're battling. They think they disagree, but they're really, one person's just trying to grow the pie and one person's just trying to redivide the pie. So it's all good. Interactive time. What is an example of a digital club good that you consume? Why is it non-rivalrous and why is it excludable? So what do you consume off the internet that anybody in theory could consume, but it's been made excludable somehow? So you're in the club, so you get to consume it. Second question, are you more interested in growing the pie or redividing it? Both are cool, but which one are you more drawn towards? Okay, now we're going to chat about the abundance of trust, which is very connected to this abundance of capital and abundance of wisdom piece. And the way that I like to think about this is, we're moving towards this information age here, where, we have this new non-rivalrous thing, information that can be spread all throughout the world. And we're in abundance of information. But do we really want it to be the information age? Like, having more information in the world is not actually that helpful. What if instead it was the trusted age, the age where everybody trusted each other and themselves and the environment? Or what if it was called the bountiful age, where everybody had enough? Or what if it was called the wisdom age, where everybody was wise and not just had information, but was actually wise? So now we're going to chat about each of those: trust, and then bountifulness, and then wisdom. So let's start with trust. So the key idea here is that we are making trust abundant on the internet. We are moving from the left to the right here. And so what is trust? Well, trust is, as this woman, Rachel Botsman, writes in her amazing book, Who Can You Trust? Trust is a confident relationship with the unknown. Where you're like, I'm not sure if I should, in this next picture, should I fall back here? Like, are you going to catch me? So you can trust people. You can, trust brands or companies. I trust Airbnb. It's this relationship with the unknown. And how do you know if you trust something? Like, how do we create trust? Well, I like to think about it as this kind of two-part thing where you have a good agent, or just like a good person, and you're like, oh, I know I can trust you. If you're a good person, I'm more likely to trust you in a good environment. So if you've not had food for 3 weeks and are really hungry, well, maybe you want to eat me, so I don't trust you as much. Or maybe you have a law that says you must kill me. Well, then that's not a little sketchy. But if you have a good person and that has good incentives, well, I'll totally trust you. I like to think of the good agent as a combination of having their needs met and also thinking from a needs perspective, where if you have all of your needs met, you're not operating from a scarcity perspective and you're actively thinking holistically. If you have that, and you have this coherently plural perspective towards life, where you try to empathize with others, take things into account, have socialized yourself out of childhood, understand your past and your superpower shadows, then you're probably good. I totally trust you. And if you're in a good environment where, this is less exdot, where if the incentives on you are good. So if there are good laws around you that stop you from killing me, if the market is incentivized for you to like do good things for me, if there are norms, like if you punch me, then you get shamed by people, and if the code stops you from, if adds friction for you doing bad things, well then you're in a good environment. So if you're a good agent in a good environment, boom, I'll totally trust you. The weird thing is that how do you know? And there are two ways to know. One is if you just have pure transparency and you can just straight up see it. The other is you might get these signals where you're like, okay, I don't really know you, but you have like a 5-star review on Uber, so I'll probably get in your car. So those are the two kinds of things, and this is a classic, just to note, a classic symbolic versus real divide here, where you have the real, which is, are they a good agent in a good environment, a good person in a good environment, while the symbolic is kind of the signal level where you're like, okay, it looks like they have 5 stars, so it's close enough. So that's how trust works. And now let's chat about the evolution of trust. So we switched from local trust back in the day, where we were just in our 150-person tribes and it was all good. You knew the people around you. We switched from that to an institutional trust, where we created these nation states and religions and banks and companies where, people would trust the U.S. government to be good, and people would trust their bank. I put money in my bank and they're this big centralized thing, and I trust that big centralized thing. And now we're moving into this world of distributed trust with something like Airbnb, where I trust, sleeping in some random person's house. And that's, that's a form of like networked or distributed trust. You can see this switch from centralized trust to distributed trust through something like the public trust in the U.S. government. It has gone down a lot, and this is true for many other governments, and also, but it's true for other governments, and it's true for other centralized institutions. So if you kind of graph this on a chart, you can see, public trust in the U.S. government is this black line. It's going down, while the use of distributed trust is going way up. I trust Wikipedia, even though it's just like this random website that anybody can edit. I trust Airbnb, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can zoom out even more and say, this switch from, we used to have tons of local trust, and that was the only kind of trust. There wasn't even a thing as a government. And then that trust, eventually we moved towards centralized trust, where we started to have, nation states and empires and religions and companies. And there's a lot of centralized trust. And then now we're moving towards this world of decentralized and distributed trust. So that's this big macro shift over time. Looking specifically at local trust, let's see the mechanisms here with our handy dandy little graph, our little chart, where if, back in your little 150-person band, how did you trust people? Well, there were norms, right? That was the part of Lessig's dot. It wasn't like there was a law against someone punching you, but if they punched you, the people didn't like it. Maybe the chieftain or whatever, he or she would get mad and would shame the person from the community. And so there are local norms, and that incentivizes people to be good. And then we just had transparency, right? Everybody knew each other. And so you could you trusted people because you knew them. Then we moved towards a centralized trust, which instead of norms being the incentive, it became, these moralizing gods, where it's like, I trust you because I know that if you punch me, you think you're gonna go to hell, and so it's all good. Like I'm gonna trust you to do this thing, or something like a government law, this big centralized entity where it says, hey, I will, if you punch me, you're gonna go to jail. So I don't think you're gonna punch me. I trust you. So we move towards a centralized trust, and now we're in this world of distributed trust. And I think this is pretty interesting, so I want to give a couple different examples here. The first is with something like Bitcoin, where the way that Bitcoin creates trust is through, the environment, the Lessig's dot here is incentives. So these miners are people, it's not like you trust the blockchain, the chain of all these transactions, because there's like a nice guy or girl who's just like putting them in the correct order. In fact, you really don't trust anybody in the system. You assume everybody's a bad agent. But everybody has a very strong financial incentive to put the blocks in the correct order and to also follow the blocks once they've been put in the correct order. So there's this deep financial incentive for the miners of the system who do that block ordering to do it correctly. And that's how you get the trust. The other crucial piece here is that the code is all open source, so it's super transparent. So you can see, hey, I trust this because, look, I can see the whole thing. I could look at the whole code base, and I know it's going to be fine. I can see how the mining actually works. It's not just someone telling me, hey, this financial incentive system is good. It's like, no, I can actually see the code. The second example of distributed trust is this thing called the Internet Research Agency, or the IRA. And it was a Russian company who used social media to influence the 2016 election. And they had this annual budget of $10 million, and they reached a ton of people, 126 million people on Facebook and millions more on other platforms. If you live in America, you probably saw one of their ads or one of their posts. And what they did is their goal was to try to pretend to be like American people and then get trust with the American people and then use that trust to kind of divide the people. So the way they did it is by pretending to be a good agent with either a bot or just like a fake account, like a sock puppet account, that then we didn't have transparency over, but we got good signals. It was like, oh, this is an account that has all these likes. Cool. I'm going to trust that account. I don't think it's, done by some random Russian dude in their basement. And as an example here, they created trust in a bunch of different identity-based communities. And so here's, how they created trust in the Black community. They made all these different web pages on Instagram and Facebook and blah, blah, blah. And they said, hey, we have all these amazing pages that all follow each other. And then they made these pictures like this one on the right that says, hey, join our team. This is amazing. We're this Black Matters crew. And so join us. And this, if this was a Magic the Gathering page or, a page about systems thinking or something that I'm into, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to join this crew. And they did this with Black folks, with white folks, with lots of different identity-based groups. And so they created this sense of trust. And the reason they were able to is because, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, right? They were able to pretend to be these people, create this trust, and then leverage that trust to... Eventually what they would do is they would create things that were anti-other groups. They create a lot of group versus group rivalries. Okay, this third kind of trust is Trump. So Trump is an example of distributed trust. And Trump has he's had some good signals, right? Where if you look at some parts of him on the internet, you're like, wow, he has so many followers, 80 million followers. He's followed by a bunch of people that I also follow. His books have a 4.5-star rating with tons of different people have rated. Like, this is a legit thing. And I obviously don't think Trump is a good person. But, the people, he was able to people trusted him though, because, this is this graph from the New York Times of him in the reason why people in these different states, why they liked Trump. And they all say, look, he tells it like it is. He's just this authentic person who they trust, who's just like they can get direct connection to him. That kind of trust, which is, positive signals, a bunch of likes and stuff, and this ability to hear him talk directly was different than the centralized old trusted institutions where they were like, no, please not Trump. With newspapers, of all the newspapers, 500 endorsed Hillary Clinton, 82 didn't endorse anybody. 30 explicitly said no Trump, anybody but Trump. And then 28 said Trump. So there were so many, this old centralized thing. I mean, a little bit decentralized, but also centralized trusted media enterprises were like, no, please no. As this quote says from Wikipedia, Clinton won support from traditionally non-political and conservative newspapers, including those that had either never before supported a Democrat or had not in many decades, or had never endorsed any presidential candidate like USA Today. So everybody was just like Republican, elsewise, never done before. Everybody was like, no Trump, please no Trump. It didn't really matter though. In the Republican Party, they were super against it as well. I mean, both George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, two old Republican presidents, both were did not support Trump. But it didn't matter. The centralized old party, Trump was able to connect with the people, and he told it like it is, and the people voted for him. And then the most classic kind of distributed trust is the sharing economy with something like Airbnb. And they use, all four of these things where you check in and see like, oh, is that other person on the other side, are they like a good person? And then there's all these incentives that Airbnb puts around where if they're a bad person, they push them off the platform or whatever. And you also get some transparency where you get to see pictures of the place, and you get the signals and things like ratings and stuff. And for me, the most interesting example of this was when Airbnb was just starting, and they had people taking really crappy pictures of their places, and nobody wanted to stay there because nobody didn't trust it. It was like a darkly lit room. And so what Airbnb did is they just took a nice camera, a DSLR camera, and took pictures at all these Airbnb places, and that increased the trust a ton for everybody, because everybody's like, oh, this place looks legit now. I'm totally going to stay here. I trust to be here. So sharing economy, Uber, Airbnb is another example of distributed trust. So we're moving to this place where although it feels like we're getting less trust in society, we're actually just getting less trust in centralized institutions, while this new kind of distributed trust is really exploding. And we're getting more and more trust. And again, just like all trust, it can be used for good, like staying at a random Airbnb, or it can be used for bad, like I would argue someone like Trump, where it's like, oh boy, the easiest example is the IRA, where it's like, hey, they are just creating fake trust and then using it for bad things. Okay, and what will this future abundance of trust look like? Well, you can imagine a future in which all of the people are good, all the agents are good, where you have companies and people who are fully bento aligned. They both have enough, they have abundance, and they take into account all of their different bento boxes, and where they think in this coherently plural way, plus the environment around them is good for them. It's not like the markets are incentivizing them to be bad for the environment, or that there are laws that stop them from being a good person. The norms encourage like good behavior, and the code, there's like more friction around bad things and then less friction around, being good to each other and whatever, instead of just like outrage everywhere. So you can imagine this. This is a future reality where everybody, it's weird to think about, but where you trust yourself deeply, you trust other people deeply, you trust companies and institutions deeply, and you trust the future and our relationship with nature differently, which is just crazy to think about now as we're in COVID with a bad government and climate change and all these things. That's the opposite. There's lots of uncertainty, and our relationship with the unknown is mostly fear. But there's a place where we can get to, which is a much more secure and safe place where we all feel trust all the time. Some worrying / interesting proto-examples of this, especially around the good agent side, it's like, oh, is this person a good person? Is something like the Chinese social credit score, where here's all these people showing, oh, I have a high score, 724. That's pretty good. And that determines, your fast tracks for visa applications. A bunch of weird things determine, if you have a high score, you get to do things. And if you have a low score, you get to do less things. And we see this as like super negative, but in the United States, we have our financial credit score already, where if you have a good credit score, you're less risky, and people will lend to you and allow you to get the house or whatever. And if you're more risky, well then, sorry, move on. And, there's the classic Black Mirror episode where this is really intense, where this is called Nosedive, and where this woman and everybody in society is always looking at each other, seeing their ratings. Kind of like you do on Twitter, where you're like, oh, this person, how many people follow this person? Okay, they're legit. I'll trust them. And so moving more and more towards this reality where you can check how good of a person everybody is a little bit sketchy, but maybe it's a good place to go. Tough to say. The other kind of scary thing with this, in addition to that pseudo-dystopian scenario, but possibly good scenario, is that the world moves at the speed of trust. And so when trust becomes abundant, if everybody trusts each other, and there are both, people trust each other more, business deals are being done more quickly, and all the protocols and standards trust each other more, everybody can just like low friction, move with each other. There's just less and less friction in society. We're going to move faster, and then stability itself will be scarce. So that is perhaps likely to happen, is us just moving quicker and quicker, especially as we trust each other more. So yeah, there's this beautiful future where trust really is abundant, and where you can, where you trust yourself and everything around you, and there's no fear about the future, and you can leave your bike outside and everybody has enough so they're not taking it, and no one's trying to exploit you or anything. That is possible. There is, the question to ask yourself kind of is, and remember that trust is positive sum, so we can just make more and more trust. And in theory, by trusting one person, it means that, then this other person sees that we're both trusting each other, so it just makes more trust. We're growing the pie of trust. And so you should ask yourself, how can I trust myself more? How can I trust others more? How can I trust institutions more? How can I trust the future more? Try to create more trust. And the other question to ask is how can we trust but verify? It's okay, I want to trust this thing, but if it goes wrong, I don't want to have all my money stolen or get killed or whatever. Okay. What does this abundant trust, or this, trusted age, what does it feel like in your body? I'm laughing because trust is all about this tension, where the emotions here are fear, right? Where if you don't trust someone, you don't feel safe around them. You're scared. And so it's amazing to think of this world where there's so much trust. And yet in that world itself is kind of scary, because it's the opposite of what we know. And there's this weird paradoxical relationship between being scared of people, so then you want to trust them, and then you trust them, and there's so much more trust. And now that everybody being trusted is kind of scary too. Okay, interactive time. Quiz. How does Bitcoin and or Airbnb, how do they use code to create trust? Second question. What do you not trust? Why not? And perhaps, how could you trust it more? I'm not trying to make you trust things, but encouraging you to think about, to try to iterate society towards more and more trust. Great. So that is what's happening with trust. Now let's chat about money and the abundance of money or value. And you could call this the bountiful age, or the age where everybody's needs are met. So first, we're talking about money here. And, the idea is that, we've had less money in the past, and now we have a lot more money. Just like this graph of the Industrial Revolution, where it's okay, the world average income was low, and then boom, now it shot up a bunch. We have more money, we have more value in the world. Or this is the classic one, less people in poverty, things are better. So what is money, though? And we're going to differentiate money from value in a second, but what is money? Well, money is essentially an IOU. If I did something good for society, if I met some needs, if I helped somebody out, gave them some food or whatever, I'll get this IOU in return, this money, and then I can use it as a medium of exchange. This is what, economists think about for why money has value. One is called the medium of exchange, where I can then take that IOU, the next day or 2 days later, and I can give it wherever. I can use it instead of needing to barter with everybody, like trading my goats for their, gold or whatever. We all just have money, and so it's used as the medium of exchange to, barter with all kinds of goods. And then there's also the store of value idea, where even if I have that money now, even if I keep it and just put it underneath my mattress, where the IOU at time 0, well, if I get it at time n in a year or 2 years or 3 years, that still has its value. That actually is a store of value. So these two concepts of medium of exchange and store of value are the crucial parts of money, that it's an IOU that has these properties. And you can really think about that IOU as, it's something that meets human needs. If I give somebody something that helps them eat, well, then they're going to give me some money in exchange, this IOU, because I met their needs. Money in the modern sense, it's a combination of both that value, like creating that IOU, but also trust. And we'll see how this plays out with a couple of examples. So how does the government create money? Well, this top piece is value. So you're like, okay, why is the US dollar valuable? It's like, okay, I don't know. It's a slip of paper. It's kind of weird. It's valuable because it can be a medium of exchange and a store of value, right? I can use that value. It's valuable because other people think it's valuable. And it's valuable because if I put it in my bed and then bring it out in 10 years, it'll still be valuable. Amazing. The other reason why it's valuable is because you can pay taxes with it. So you can think of the US government as a big suction machine, a big vacuum cleaner that's creating tons of demand every year for US dollars. It's like, okay, it's April. Time again to get your US dollars out from your, pockets, and because we want them. And so then there's going to be so much demand for that thing because you need to pay the US government with it, with your taxes. So that's why the US dollar has a lot of value. It also has a lot of trust, right? There's the trust in the laws and the institutions. The US government as an institution, the central bank, to not print too much money or whatever. And even things like, this FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, where you put your money into a bank, and then if the banks kind of go down, or if that specific commercial bank like Wells Fargo goes down, well, then you are insured by the U.S. government to get $100,000 or $250,000 back, or your money up to that amount. And so, yeah, there's this sense of trust where you have this money, you put it on your bank account, it's all going to be good, it's all too big to fail, everybody's in the system, and even if it does fail, you'll get a good amount of it back. So fiat money is value and trust. How does Bitcoin, though, create money? Why? So on the value side, Bitcoin is valuable. Like, why would a Bitcoin? It's just this series of bits, essentially, and that can be accessed with this private key. So why is that valuable? Well, it's valuable because it's a censorship-resistant store of value. What that means is that if I'm in Venezuela, where it's hard to access US dollars, but where my money, my own currency, my Venezuelan bolivars, are going up, they're inflating a bunch. So the $100 I used to have is worth like nothing now, and I can't get US dollars. Well, I can actually access Bitcoin over the internet, and I can take my Venezuelan money and turn it into Bitcoin in a censorship-resistant, permissionless way, get that money and access it, and then it'll actually have a store of value there, where the Bitcoin, although it's volatile from a U.S. perspective, it's actually a lot less volatile than the Venezuelan bolivars, which have hyperinflation. So that's one reason why it's valuable. The other reason is because of fees. So you need to, in order to get stuff onto the Bitcoin blockchain, especially if it's too full, you need to pay the miners a fee in order to put your transaction onto the next block. And those fees, it's just like the US government kind of has a big vacuum cleaner of like, okay, you need to pay us taxes, therefore give us this thing. So too with fees, where there's this Bitcoin blockchain, which kind of sucks. It's like, okay, there's going to be demand for this thing because you're going to need to pay the fees on the Bitcoin blockchain. Then what about trust, though? Why does Bitcoin have trust? Well, it's a trust, as we chatted about before, it's a trust in the code and the networks, where you can view the open source code. There's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. That's hard-coded in there. You can see the code. The miner incentives. They're super financially incentivized to do the correct things with the blockchain. And so, yeah, you trust it. So that's how we get this magic internet money of Bitcoin. Now, the interesting thing here is, we've chatted about both these things, why money is an IOU with a medium exchange and store of value, and how money kind of has these two inputs where you need it to be valuable and you need to be trusted. Now let's take that and apply to this history of abstracting money. So back in the day, we had commodity money. And that meant a commodity like salt was just used enough that it was used as money. Where you're like, look, I got this salt. Instead, I'm going to pay you in salt because I'll know that someone else will want that salt later, or I'll take salt and it's these commodities, whether it's salt or silver, any of these things, seashells were a classic one back in the day, which are they're valuable because they're an actual commodity that people want to use. And so we had this idea of this commodity money, but there wasn't very much of it, right? And then we switched to government money, where we just printed money. And initially, the government money was connected to commodities. So the most of the world was on the gold standard until 1970, which had a direct connection of U.S. dollars to gold, where you could exchange if you wanted to. You could go to your local gold/dollar person and take your U.S. dollars and get gold in return. And so the paper money was just kind of a abstraction on top of the commodity money of gold. But then what we did is in 1970, you said, we don't really need to connect the money to gold anymore. We went off the gold standard. And now we have this funny meme of haha money printer go burr, which just means we can print money now. U.S. government can print as much money as, not as much, but central banks can now print lots of money. And they don't have to connect it. They don't need to have like the gold backing it anymore. It's just like you can just print money. And so what that did is it allowed us to create more and more money. The weird thing, though, is that not all that fiat money was good. Something like the US dollars was pretty good because we didn't print too much of it, and it was useful all around the world. But something like the Zimbabwe money, they printed too much of it. And so you have this note of $100 trillion, which is a lot of, that's because they just had to keep on adding zeros and zeros and zeros because the money was inflating so much. Or there's this example down here of other bad money. This is in the Reichsmark in Germany in the 1920s, where, again, so much inflation, the government was just printing money because they needed to print. It was post-war time, they needed to print lots of money. And they printed so much money that the old money was worthless. And instead of using that money for buying stuff, people were just burning it instead because it was better to burn it than it was to use it as money. So this is to say, this, just like all of our abstraction things, the government has created this abstraction of money, which has allowed it to produce tons and tons of it. And sometimes it's a good thing with US dollars where you don't print too much, it's not that inflationary. But then sometimes it's a bad thing where you print way too much of it and it's not actually good money. It's just there's a lot of bills. Similarly with crypto, where we have some of these, good monies like Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, but something like, Ethereum and those ICOs, they allowed people to create money and any different weird kind of money, and anybody could create it. And so you had a bunch of people creating all these weird experiments, some of which were good, but some of which were not so good. So that is how we've created more and more money. But so when you think about this, like what we need to do is also make value abundant, where it's like you can create tons and tons of money and just like print US dollars all you want, or print a bunch of Reese coins. But just because you have a bunch of Reese coins, that doesn't like help that many people. We need to actually create more value in the world. We need to grow the pie. We need to find new ways to rearrange bits and atoms, to create t-shirts and give people food and help them grow wiser and whatever. We need to create more value. So we need to make value itself abundant. Okay? And that's this difference between money and value. And value, again, that's just meeting human needs. And, this is a true example of creating lots of value with the Industrial Revolution, where we really created, before this, there were not, things were worse. And then not everybody, but lots of people had more things and quote unquote better lives. And you could have light on in your house, and you had a car, and you could watch people. You were spending less hours doing the laundry and all these things because of the Industrial Revolution. So yeah, it actually created more value in the world, not just more money. So I like to think of this in the future as, this abundance of meeting human needs, where, we don't just want to make money more valuable. We want to make we don't want to make money more abundant. We want to make value itself, like this idea of capital or value or, bounty or meeting human needs. We want to make that abundant. We want to make it so everybody's basic needs are met, so that everybody has UBI. And we want to make it so that everybody has an access to a future me that they love and a meaningful life. and that their now us community is amazing, and that the future us is sustainable and climate change isn't happening. That we can get to this place where all of our needs are met. And that's the true realization of abundant money or abundant value. And as a reminder, and we'll chat about this in our third video, the next video, that this abundance where people's needs are met leads directly to generosity. But again, we'll touch on that later. Okay, so yeah, this is similar to the trusted one, where you can imagine this beautiful future world. But if trust is all about trusting other people and trusting the future and trusting institutions, this one of bountifulness and there being enough money in the world is more about your own ability to meet needs. And so we're getting more, you can imagine a future reality where we get more and more to a point where everybody's needs are met. And where money itself is abundant. And if you have it in your pocket, you're happy to give it to someone else. And if you have a bike, you are happy to give it to someone else because there's enough of all those things. What does abundant value, or this bountiful age, what does that feel like in your body? Yeah, a bit tension-filled, a bit confused, where I do think that this future is possible and hopefully true, and we're not there yet, but I am optimistic. Okay, interactive time. So quiz, how is value different from money? And how can you create lots of money without value actually backing it? Second question here, is it actually possible to meet all of our human needs? Right? You might be a little bit skeptical of that. Is that possible, or like what would make it possible for you to believe that? Great. Now we're going to chat about number 4 here, the abundance of wisdom. And we already have this abundance of info where it's like we got all this information out there, a lot of memes and stuff. And what wisdom looks more like is that we have this environment where the information is all good information, where people are wiser, That's kind of what this future looks like. Not just info everywhere, but people actually being wise. So to understand that, let's look at the difference between information and knowledge and wisdom. And information is really just bits, right? It's on the internet, anything that can be put in a TCP/IP packet, sent all around the world, whatever. It can be music, it can be an MP3, it can be a picture, it can be a meme. It doesn't have to be a good or bad thing. It's simply just digits, all the digits of pi. That's information. It's not that helpful, but that's what it is. And that's what we have now, is an abundance of just stuff on the internet. That's different than knowledge, right? Knowledge are justified, true beliefs that are reproduced by humans over time. So that is a thing that's justified, where you're like, okay, I know, like something like 2 + 2 = 4. We have a justification for it. It's true. We believe it to be true. And it's been shared by humans over time. And this idea of knowledge in science or whatever, it's shown by things on the internet like Wikipedia or Khan Academy, where it's not just like random memes or whatever, and I like memes, but it's actual knowledge that you can then get into your brain. And, there's some cool proto examples of us getting more and more knowledge on the internet. I mean, something like Wikipedia is a great example of this, but other things are this idea of spaced repetition software, where you see something new, some knowledge piece, and then you are going to forget it. So then you remind yourself of it a day later, 2 days later, 5 days later, 14 days later, so that it actually gets in your mind. And so instead of just being an information, consumer and infovore, you're actually really getting that knowledge deep within you. There's this course by Tiago Forte called Building a Second Brain. And that's, again, this idea of knowledge where we have our brain, but we have our external brain, our computer. How can we use that in this great way that actually provides us with knowledge and helps us progress in society? And by the way, both these pictures are by Maggie Appleton. Amazing pictures. So that's knowledge. And we're getting closer to, a knowledge age where more people can access knowledge, but we're not there yet, of course. We're even further away from wisdom, because wisdom is the right use of knowledge. So not just, 2 plus 2 equals 4, for example, it can be used for good or for evil. I can say, 2 bullets plus 2 bullets equals 4 bullets, therefore I can kill 4 people. That's evil. But if I say 2 kittens plus 2 kittens equals 4 kittens, I'm going to bring all these kittens to the party. Well, that's a use of it for good. So this wisdom is really adding this ethical piece to it, right? We have this, epistemology, this study of knowledge of the world and the ontology of the true things. And so we're studying true things. And then, well, what do we do with it? Where are we going in society? And that's where you can take this full bentoist perspective into account and think of the 2x2 and say, let's actually use it for good. Let's use it to meet human needs. There are some good proto-examples of this happening on the internet where we're trying to make wisdom more abundant. Something like Calm is a meditation app. And even LeBron James is now, hosting Calm sessions. Or, Talkspace is a therapy app. And Michael Phelps is repping that one. Or something here, psychedelics, good or bad or otherwise, they have these ego-dissolving properties that let you think more from a fully bento perspective, kind of. And that is spreading as well in society. And so you have some of these examples of people getting wiser as they do meditation and therapy and things like that. Wisdom is really, back to this coherently plural example here, wisdom is all about education. It's both getting good glasses put on you as a child and then recognizing what those glasses are and then thinking from this multi-lens perspective. That is what you want. And you want people to go through this process of childhood and adult development to get wiser and wiser and to use knowledge, to gain knowledge, and then use it for good. I like to think of, there's a scene from The Matrix where Neo puts a jack into his head and he feels it deeply. And then he says, I know Kung Fu at that. And then he's able to fight Samuel Jackson. And that's cool. The I know Kung Fu side is kind of like him getting it, and that's getting knowledge, right? If he was just got jacked in and just had zeros and ones pumped into his brain, that would be getting information. While if he got Kung Fu pumped into his brain and also this idea of how to use Kung Fu for good, that would be wisdom. And back to the education perspective, there are some issues perhaps with our educational system, and a reason why we haven't, the question is, why is information super abundant, but knowledge and wisdom are not yet abundant on the internet? And part of it is because it's connected to just our educational systems generally. I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but this is a graph of the cost of education. This is public school spending. You also have similar ones with something like college education versus our scores for reading, math, and science, which are flat, which is kind of sad. It's like you'd expect if the cost goes up, we should get better at it. And so hopefully we'll get better and better in society at educating each other and ourselves more, and we will then be more knowledgeable and more wise. But again, what's an actual business model for wisdom here? Wisdom and education is usually in this future us category, where it's like, the U.S. federal government put a bunch of money, federal, but especially actually local and state governments, put a bunch of money towards future us and said, hey, let's care about creating this amazing educated workforce for our future. Yeah, how are we going to do that with wisdom? How do we create a business model such that everybody gets wise? And to conclude here, I think that, or almost conclude, I think that wisdom is, you can think of it as this good agent piece up here, where it's like, can we create wiser people in society, people that use their knowledge for good? I do want to highlight one funny paradox here, which is, imagine that we got better and better at creating wise humans that got a ton of knowledge and then used it for good. Is it actually possible to get a graph like this one on the left, where you get an abundance of wisdom, where we have an amazing educational system and people get hooked into the internet in this amazing way and they get really wise? Can you actually have a bad and good there? Is bad wisdom possible? I kind of don't think so. I think wisdom is kind of self-definitionally it looks like this graph on the right, where it is people using their knowledge, this new abundance of knowledge, for good. So it's shifted right. Okay, so that's what wisdom could look like. And the wisdom age is one where instead of just being inundated with information all the time and outrage from the internet and clickbait headlines and just a completely financialized and attention-grabbing internet, instead we have an internet that looks closer to a nice friend and a teacher. An internet that looks closer to a teacher, one that's helping you get knowledge, helping you with Wikipedia, helping you grow over time, helping you use your second brain, and then use it all for good. Someone that's teaching you what it's like to use your powers of knowledge ethically. That's possible. We can all become wise too. What does the wisdom age feel like in your body? I think I feel sad and annoyed that our current internet is so far away from this. We're learning and we're getting better and better systems for not just information overload and outrage and attention economy stuff. But I'm sad about our current state and I'm annoyed with it. And it's also a huge opportunity things like, meditation apps and, more and more therapy in the world. That's amazing. I think sometimes about my own parents and my parents' generation, how for them, a lot of them grew up with more especially alcoholic fathers. And that was just more difficult for them. And so they had some of that trauma, the hurt people thing. And then they passed a little bit on to me, but not much. And I'm going to be able to help my own kids and teach them meditation. Right now I tell my dad to meditate and get my dad into therapy. But now in the future, my kids are going to be in therapy from day one, They're going to be meditating in the womb. I'm excited for that as a future. Okay, interactive time. What have you learned recently that was information, knowledge, and then wisdom? Second question, how would you make everyone wiser? If you had a button or a protocol to implement or some way to make everyone wiser, how would you do it? Great. So that is today's episode, today's lesson. We chat about the different resource types, public versus private goods, and then positive versus negative sum, or positive versus zero sum. We talked about, abundance of trust and value and wisdom. And I just want to note that trust and, value or bountifulness and wisdom, they're all in a loop with each other. Where if you would trust a world where everybody feels like their needs are met, has bountifulness, and also is using their knowledge wisely and ethically, that's a world I would totally trust. And so these things are connected to each other in this way where if we have more bountifulness and more wisdom and more trust, they all kind of help each other become more abundant. Okay, what is it going to feel like to integrate your learning, and what should you watch out for? So the first is that, you'll start to think about, rivalrous and excludable goods. And you'll start to see, something like, you start to see goods like, that's rivalrous. We both can't have that thing. Oh, that's excludable. You're excluding that from other people. Even though it's not rivalrous, everybody should have that thing. What's going on? And you'll also start to, instead of just saying X is a public good, you'll start to say, well, is that thing actually a public good? Is it non-rivalrous and non-excludable? You can actually do that check now. I also think a crucial thing here for me was just seeing things as club goods. I never knew what a club good was before, but knowing that it is a non-rivalrous thing that anybody in theory could have, but is currently being excluded, maybe for good reasons, that is seeing club goods more is a part of your learning. Also, you'll start to play these long-term positive sum win-win games with, long-term positive sum win-win people. This is a great way to interact in life in general, is to try to interact with folks who are trying to make win-win things. And to some extent, I agree with that. But also there's this balance between kind of these builder types who are trying to make the pie bigger, and a lot of like tech gets into this mindset, versus the critiquer types, the tech ethics folks who say, wait a second, this is not about building the pie. This is about looking at how much surveillance happens on Facebook, or how much, income inequality happens as a result of these things, or how much, there's ghost work happening by like the really poor person needing to work in the COVID Amazon factory. And that is a very reasonable perspective too. So yeah, I think that trying to play these positive sum games with people is great, and recognizing the dividing redivision perspective as well. Trust is another thing you'll start to think about with the abundance of trust, and trying to just, thinking about, why do you trust stuff on the internet? Why are people trusting things on the internet? What signals are they getting? What incentives do you have? Or do they have to trust the thing? And also start to think about how you can trust more people. Trying to trust more people, I think, is a good thing, as long as you do it in a safe way. You'll also start to see more bountifulness and thinking about how we can grow the pie, something like progress studies, and thinking, how can we make more and more progress for everybody? You'll also start to see this wisdom piece where, and for me, the wisdom is, instead of being just an information vor, an information consumer, or instead of being even someone who's just getting lots of cool knowledge, it's like, no, it's like, how can we use this knowledge in a wise way? How can we, how do we see each other as ethical beings that are using knowledge in a good way, and how to create more of that? And so you'll start to see these things, and there'll be some optimism. I mean, I have optimism on this trusted, bountiful, and wise future. And also, it is so far away. Thank you for listening. Hope you're well. And thank you. If you're interested in these ideas and want to create a trusted, bountiful, and wise future, check out the Root Fellowship at root.co. Goodbye.